Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. It really is such an honor to share my work with all of you. And as you just heard, my background is in traditional embroidery. So I have been promoting, preserving, educating, and sharing traditional embroidery work from Transylvania, Romania, more recently from northern Portugal, and also from Ukraine, and growing as I travel and learn from people on site. But my original education is in fine art, and I have been working with photography for off and on for a long time, and I'm now incorporating stitching into my photo mixed media work. So that's what I'm going to show with you quickly today. So yeah, so here is the first image. So I have a series of images that I'm still working on called Threshold. And they are printed, they have been printed during COVID on my laser printer at home. That was what was possible and easy. And these images come from my walks in the city, so mostly coming from my immediate neighborhood. And I'm really interested in transitional spaces. So walking through the city, that may be just even crossing the street, being on the sidewalk, looking at windows and walls and entryways to buildings as these portals, thinking about the possibility of transformation, or maybe even getting to know myself differently in the time that I'm moving through the city, or, you know, stepping out onto the curb, or of course, things like crossing under an archway. So I started combining my photographs from these walks with drawing with ink and cutting out shapes with a blade, as well as doing a simple back stitch. And my artwork has always been about line in some form or another. So I'm really just working with that simple stitched line in there, that reference to textiles, to the traditional embroidery that I work with. And all of them, I'm always looking at traditional clothing from different cultures. So this is called X Marks the Spot. And I have a Romanian sleeve that I'm referencing here. A branch that actually comes from a printed textile from Eastern Europe. And then the side of that form that's coming out of the doorway is a leaf from a chintz print. So coming from the Dutch East India Company. And then it moves down into almost like a flourish from an elaborate signature in a jagged line coming from a pleated apron. And so I'm thinking a lot about gesture, about stitching, about the movement as I stitch, about the gesture of drawing and of handwriting, of textiles as text. And then with the cutting, you know, peeling back the paper and thinking about what's beneath the surface. So in this case, you know, what's under the X that was written in chalk on the street, like where's the buried treasure, or one thing that is really fascinating about living in Amsterdam now is the history, of course, and the fact that the city is really built on a swamp. So there are layers and layers of kind of detritus of bits of pottery, things that have been kind of buried in the mud in the canals over the years. And so I think about all of that, like literally that history of material culture that's under the earth. And I, in the same way that I want to kind of peel back the surface of that window and that curtain in the first image, I feel like I want to peel up the floor and really look under the ground and see what's there. So let's look at the last image here. So this is Untitled Ghost. And in this image, I am working with an image of a contemporary blouse and a big pleated skirt there on the right, that jagged line that's cut that also could come from the bunting. Like right now, there's a big European football match. People have orange bunting, those orange triangle flags everywhere. So I'm really pulling in imagery from my daily life, what I see on the street, as well as referencing a poppy from a Ukrainian scarf that's also cut, or a coral necklace. And then, imposing that onto these scenes, these windows, and different places in the city. And there's a quote I would like to read to you. I've been reading the work of British anthropologist Tim Ingold, and he writes, "The hand can tell stories of the world in its gestures and in the written or drawn traces they yield, or in the manipulation of threads, as in weaving, lace making, and embroidery. His notion of the telling of the hand is to trace a path that others can follow." And he emphasizes the secondary definition of the verb to tell, which is to recognize subtle clues in one's environment and respond to them with judgment and precision. So I'm thinking about that a lot. I'm thinking about what I'm doing as a form of map making in the literal, in the photography, like marking points in the city, points in my neighborhood. And then the actual drawing that goes into it feels like a form of mapping as well. And in terms of the process, the stitching, the drawing, the cutting, and the storytelling involved, I think about back to those gestures, the knowledge in our hands as we stitch, the discernment in our movements, thinking about his idea of to tell, to discern, that we're stitching and we're creating, almost without thinking, kind of navigating through what we're making, whether that's stitching an embroidery pattern or quilting or, whatever you're working with. So, yeah, I'm really interested in our ideas of folk and rural in an urban environment, and this idea of crossing boundaries, like I said, crossing the threshold, crossing from kind of one realm to another, the historical to the contemporary, and the unknown and the known, and what is present, what is hidden, and also the correlation between how we dress our windows and how we dress our body. So that is what I have to share. I will say that I'm working larger scale now. I'm now getting into printing at a larger scale and experimenting with that and looking at other methods of printing that are beyond my home printer. So I think there's one more slide related to my other work. So in addition to this work, I'm teaching workshops, and I'm going to be teaching an online studio class for the EGA, which is very exciting. And also I forgot to mention that I am doing an encore lecture, which is, I gave a lecture in April, and I'm going to be giving the same lecture again. And the topic is folk embroidery from 3 different countries, from Hungarian, Transylvania, Romania, from Portugal, and also from Western Ukraine. So that's August 15th. And then I would love to see you in the fall, in the winter, for the Hungarian embroidery class with the EGA. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And can you repeat who you're giving the presentation for in August, or where we can register for that?
Yeah, it's for the EGA. It's part of their lecture series, their international lecture series. It's yeah, August 15th. I can send you more information about that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And we've got, let's see, 2 questions for you right now, at least. First question is, could you speak a little bit more about the materials that you're mixing in your Threshold series?
Literally the materials, so I'm stitching through paper, through fairly thin paper, and then and I'm using cotton embroidery floss for now. So regular 6-stranded floss, 3 strands. And then I'm stitching or drawing with ink. So, you know, a permanent ink.
And let's see, one participant says a soft threshold, a very intriguing concept, placing yourself within the landscape and locating oneself within a new reality. So more of a comment. And feeding off of that, another comment was that I love the peeks into the transitional spaces, and these hints of stitching and cut work. We really feel that you as the artist are revealing not just the space, but your experience of the space. And we feel the idea of hidden layers. Can you speak a little bit about what engages you? Like, how do you decide on the space that you photograph and then respond to, or is it really more intuitive?
Yeah, let's see. It's a combination of things. It is very intuitive, yes. Trying to think if there are certain things that I'm looking for. I am looking for evidence of textiles. So I'm looking for dropped ribbons. So I have a lot of, or not a lot, more and more. There aren't that many out there anymore. Girls are not wearing ribbons so much, but that's something that I'm collecting and going to be working with. So I'm looking for textiles on the street. I'm also looking at peeling posters, and I'm with the scale of my work and thinking about it almost referencing more, working more with street art in a way with posters, peeling paper. So I'm sometimes looking for peeling paper and making a connection between the peeling paper of a poster with a sleeve, with a fabric, with a textile. So, but yeah, in terms of which windows and doorways, looking at, I don't know, the certain quality of the space, and often the textile that's hanging, like the first image that I showed you is actually a very common synthetic faux lace. You see a lot. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm thinking about now how I use that as a marker when I go through the city. Now I spot that type of curtain as I move, and I know very well where that image was taken, and so I think of that. It really is kind of a process of finding my way and rooting myself, creating relationships with these places that, you know, in some cases I think people would say are not that interesting, but I'm, you know, finding something there that's appealing, questions to ask about it.
Thank you very much. And I have to admit, it's really interesting to see how the lights and shadows are falling on you as you speak.
Oh, yeah.
They're very reminiscent of your compositions. I know you planned that.
Oh yes, of course.
But no, thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your work. It's really beautiful to see how you're working both in a contemporary and a traditional sense, and blending the two with your own voice in a really beautiful way.
Thank you so much. Thank you.